What's going on, YouTube? This is SG1 Sports, and we're going to give you the 10 games that will decide the SEC in 2019. So we're going to start with the SEC West, and I'll kind of give you my reasoning as to why I'm putting the games where I'm putting them. In the SEC West, it goes through Alabama. For a team to have any chance to win the SEC West, I think you have to beat Alabama. If you lose to Alabama, you would need to win the rest of your games and need Alabama to lose 2 other games. So that's just not going to happen. Alabama is not going to lose 2 games this year, in my opinion. Nick Saban's just not going to let that happen. So who are the teams that are most likely to beat Alabama? I think LSU is the second best team in the West, but I actually think Auburn has the best chance to beat Alabama because they get them at home. It's a rivalry. They've been the only team really that's been able to beat Alabama multiple times in the last several years. So those are the teams that I'm really considering in the West. Texas A&M, I know it sounds like I hate this team. I just think they're a year away. Their schedule is really tough, so I don't really see them as a contender. So at number 5, we've got Auburn at Texas A&M September 21st. And this game's not really on here because of Texas A&M. Like I said, I don't really see them as a contender. They might be a better team than Auburn this year, but it's just the way Auburn's schedule lines up with Georgia and Alabama at home late in the year. I think they have a better chance to maybe make a run and surprise some people. But yeah, this game's on here really because of Auburn. Auburn has to beat Alabama, and they can lose 1 game other than that game because Alabama's not going to lose 2 games. So yeah, maybe they lose to LSU, or maybe they lose to Florida, or maybe they lose to Georgia. They can't afford a loss to Texas A&M because I don't see them beating all of those other teams. So this will be a huge game for Auburn if they're going to have a chance to win the SEC West. I've got Auburn at Texas A&M at number 5. And really, it's the same exact thing here at number 4 for Auburn. I don't know if they can afford a loss to LSU. That may be a tough one. That could be the game that they lose, though. They could lose to LSU, win the rest of their games, including a win over Alabama, and maybe get there. But then you might wind up with a 3-way tie possibly with LSU, Alabama, and Auburn. But this is a huge game for LSU. LSU cannot afford to lose this game. If they are able to pull off the upset and beat Alabama, again, they're going to have to win the rest of their games except for 1. They'll be able to lose 1 game. When you look at their schedule, it's hard to imagine them beating everyone else. So they have to at least beat Auburn. They have to win this game at home. Again, I think this is a huge game for LSU. Now at number 3, we got Alabama at Texas A&M on October the 12th. And I said that Alabama's not going to lose 2 games. But this is a game that maybe Alabama would slip up on because it's on the road. And if Alabama is going to have any chance to lose 2 games, I think it's going to be to Auburn or LSU and to Texas A&M because this game's on the road again. Very, very tough place to play. Jimbo Fisher is an excellent coach. I think he'll have his team very well prepared for this game. This is going to be just a monster game for Texas A&M. They'll already be battle tested. They would have already faced Clemson on the road. So perhaps they could pull off the upset. I don't really see it happening, but I know a lot of people really believe in Texas A&M. So I'm going to give them some credit here. And I'm going to say that this is a big game. And it's the only chance Alabama could potentially lose 2 games if they lose to Texas A&M and then again to maybe Auburn or LSU. At number 2, it's the Iron Bowl. It's Alabama at Auburn, November 30th. This is going to be a huge game in the SEC West. And like I said, I think Auburn has the best chance out of anyone in the SEC at beating Alabama. Texas A&M does get them at home as well. So I would put them at a close number 2. But not only does Auburn need to win this game, like I said, they can only afford 1 other loss. So it's very hard to imagine Auburn actually winning the West. It's really hard to imagine anyone outside of Alabama. But if it was going to happen, I think this could be one of the paths that it happens. I think Alabama could get upset by Auburn. Auburn maybe loses to LSU or loses to Florida, wins the rest of their games. Very unlikely, but it's possible. Number 1, though, is obvious. It's LSU at Alabama. If this game was in Baton Rouge this year, I would really, really give LSU a good chance of winning this game. But playing on the road, I just don't really see it happening. LSU, I think, is going to be really, really good this year. I think they're potentially one of the top 4 teams in the country. But like I said, going on the road to beat Alabama is going to be really tough. It's possible, though. And again, this could be the game that decides the division. I think LSU is capable of winning the rest of their games except maybe 1. And maybe they could even win the rest of their games. But yeah, LSU is the team that I think has the best chance of getting to the SEC championship out of the West outside of Alabama. Now, I think, again, Auburn has a better chance head-to-head versus Alabama, but LSU, I think, has a better chance when you look at the rest of their schedule. They could win every game. So that is what I'm thinking. That's the biggest game in the SEC West. I think everyone would agree with that. You may not agree with the other games in the order that I put them in, but you've got to agree with number one. I think you're going to agree with number one in the East as well. I think it's Florida and Georgia. I don't really see anyone else having a legitimate chance here. Missouri is kind of a dark horse team for me. I'm going to do this video as if Missouri could play in the SEC championship. I think they're still appealing their bowl ban, so we'll see what happens with that. So yes, I'm including Missouri in here, but I don't think South Carolina can get through their schedule. I don't think Kentucky, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt are going to be good enough. So it's just really Florida and Georgia, and then maybe Missouri could make a dark horse run at the SEC East because their schedule sets up really well. But to me, it's Florida and Georgia. So let's keep that in mind and think about this. Does the loser of the Florida-Georgia game, are they automatically out? Not necessarily, because the winner could still lose 2 games. Both of these teams have really tough schedules. So we're actually going to have some cross-divisional matchups on this list. At number 5, we have Auburn at Florida. And again, let's say Florida beats Georgia, and Georgia finishes with that one loss. Florida cannot afford to lose 2 games, or they're not going to go to the SEC championship. And you look at their schedule, again, look at this game against Auburn. This is going to be a tough game for Florida, especially just the matchup of Florida's offensive line versus Auburn's defensive line. You're talking about probably the best defensive line in the SEC. So Florida can't slip up in another game, another couple of games, even if they do beat Georgia. At number 4, we have Florida at Missouri, and it's the same thing. Florida has struggled with Missouri the last couple of years. They can't afford 2 losses. So let's say they do lose to Auburn, or maybe they get upset by South Carolina or someone. Then they lose again to Missouri, and all of a sudden, even though they beat Georgia, they're not going to the SEC championship. And if Missouri is going to be a dark horse contender, if they're going to have a chance to maybe make a run, they have to win this game. I think they could lose to Georgia. Georgia could still lose a couple of games. Let's say Georgia loses to Florida and maybe Auburn. Missouri could still sneak in there. So that's why I see Missouri as a dark horse contender, and really the only team that has a shot outside of Florida and Georgia. But to me, it's really just Florida and Georgia. So this will be a big game, I think, for both of these teams. A huge, huge game on November 16th. On that same day, November 16th, we've got Georgia at Auburn. And again, we go back to the 2-loss scenario. If Georgia beats Florida, they still have to get through the rest of their schedule with just 1 loss or go undefeated, obviously. This is going to be a really tough game. And Jordan-Hare, last time they played there, Auburn beat them. And they beat them by a lot. It's a different year. A lot of things are different from 2 years ago. But still, it's a tough place to play. It's a rivalry game. So that's a game I could see Georgia potentially slipping up on. Let's say they lose another game. Let's say they lose to Texas A&M, or they get upset somewhere along the way, and then they lose this game to Auburn. So then you beat Florida, but wind up not even going to the SEC championship. And of course, Florida would have to win the rest of their games. So that still is going to be pretty tough to do. At number 2, we have Florida and LSU, and it's again the same scenario that I've been talking about. We're really just looking at the winner of the Georgia-Florida game potentially not going to the SEC championship because they lose 2 games and because the loser wins the rest of their games. And that's really, that's the only thing we can look at, because I think it is going to come down to that Florida-Georgia game, which I'll show you in just a second. But I'm just looking at other scenarios, other ways that these games could affect that SEC East race. And again, Florida could lose to Auburn. They could lose here to LSU. Even though if they beat Georgia, they might not go to the SEC championship. So that's why hopefully that makes sense, my reasoning why I put these games on here. But at the end of the day, it comes down to this. It's Florida, Georgia. I think the winner of this game will win the SEC East. I feel confident in saying that. I think both of these teams might lose another game on the schedule, possibly. And then you lose this game, you've got 2 losses, and you're out. And the winner of this game is probably going to go to the SEC championship with 1 loss. Or, Georgia, I think, will have a legitimate chance to go undefeated. I think Florida for sure will lose 1 game outside of this. So this is it. This is the game that will decide the SEC East. It's Florida versus Georgia on November 2nd. It's one of the biggest games in all of college football for the 2019 season. And like I said, I think this game will decide the SEC East. Thank you for watching this video. If you're an SEC football fan, please subscribe to the channel. Leave us your thoughts down in the comments below. And for the latest in SEC football, keep it right here.